So we're at 4 o'clock, everybody. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. And with our event today, people will still be coming in. We're at over 80 people, I think now, 90, 91. So good. I'm very happy to see you all today. So first, I guess I want to say welcome, right? Welcome to our presentation today with Dr. Peter Marks of the FDA. I'm with the Program for Writing and Rhetoric at CU Boulder. I'm also the chair of our program's Sustainability Committee. Our committee helps faculty and students develop curriculum that explores sustainability issues, and we work to help our community better understand these issues. I first want to say thank you, Dr. Marks, for taking time to talk with us this afternoon. Dr. Marks has lots to keep him busy today and every day. He's got another article that refers to him in the New York Times, and yesterday he had an article referring to him in the New York Times. So if you want to know what's going on with him right now, check out some of the articles online right now in regard to the COVID vaccines. His name will be there. Anyway, he's a very busy person who gets a lot of calls from a lot of people, including from the White House, and yet he's with us here today. I want to thank you very much for doing that. So over the last 6 months, COVID-19 has changed all of our lives. We're quarantined, we're alone, we're doing events like this on Zoom. We've quit going on vacations, we've quit going out to dinner, quit going to see family and friends. For more than 6 months, it has felt like we're on a slow-moving COVID highway, locked in our own isolated cars with no exit. So a COVID vaccine offers a promise of an exit, and Dr. Marks makes big decisions about vaccines for the FDA. So we're very lucky to have him with us here today. So we are recording this presentation, and we will be putting it on the Program for Writing and Rhetoric's YouTube channel. I think KGNU, a local radio station, might be recording it as well. Also, if you'd like to ask a question of Dr. Marks that doesn't get covered today, we'll open the chat option and in a few minutes, and you can write up your question. We can't promise we'll get to all of them. We already have a lot of questions that the public and students have submitted. I'm going to let Dr. Alexander Forbes, also with the Program for Writing and Rhetoric at CU Boulder, who did much to make today's presentation possible, introduce Dr. Marks. Alex?
Thank you, Dr. Dixon. On behalf of the Sustainability Committee of the University of Colorado Boulder's Program for Writing and Rhetoric, it's my great honor today to introduce our special guest. We consider ourselves extremely fortunate to be able to host Dr. Peter Wayne Marks, who is currently the U.S. Food and Drug Administration's top regulator for vaccines. Dr. Marks received his graduate degree in cell and molecular biology and his medical degree at New York University. He subsequently served as clinical director of hematology at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, and later as associate professor of medicine at Yale. In 2012, he joined the FDA, where he is currently director of their Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research, which is responsible for ensuring the safety and effectiveness of biological products, including vaccines, allergenic products, blood and blood products, cellular, tissue, and gene therapies. Very much hope you'll appreciate hearing from Dr. Marks, the scientist who, in the words of the Washington Post, holds the fate of the coronavirus vaccine in his hands. Posing questions to Dr. Marks today is our moderator, Dr. Dawn Colley, instructor in CU Boulder's Program for Writing and Rhetoric and its liaison to CU's Division of Continuing Education. Dr. Colley.
Thank you, Alex. And hello, Dr. Marks. We wanted to begin with some foundational questions before moving into the more complicated issues surrounding the development of a COVID vaccine, if that would be okay. So could we start with an explanation about why vaccines are so important to public health, how vaccines are developed and approved in general, and what differences there are in this particular process for the development of a vaccine against COVID-19?
Thanks so much. First of all, thanks so much for having me today. And those are three really great questions. And I'll try to keep them in order. And if I forget them, I may come back to you. But let me start with the first thing, which is that, you know, vaccines are a victim of their own success in some ways, because really none of us really know what smallpox looks like anymore because we don't see it. None of us knows what paralytic polio looks like unless you've actually worked in the low and middle income countries few of them outside of the United States. And measles also is in that same category, although we've had our bouts with it with re-imported cases. So one of the great successes of 20th century medicine, which started out even before the 20th century, was the ability of vaccines to be used to essentially overcome infectious diseases that took many lives. And even when they weren't taking lives, they created disfigurement and sometimes long-lasting adverse effects after the actual viral infections themselves. So really, when you think about it, as much as some people try to deny it, there really is no denying that smallpox was brought under control by very aggressive smallpox vaccination programs with a very effective vaccine. That vaccine dates back, obviously, to Edward Jenner centuries before in terms of the way it was thought about. And when you think about these other diseases, they make such a big difference. Vaccines also, just to help understand, vaccines are doing something, although it's true that today's vaccines do sometimes involve synthetic materials. What they're doing ultimately is the same thing that happens all the time. Sometime earlier today, I'm sure when my dog licked me, something in his tongue that he picked up on the street was a bacteria that I haven't seen before. And I'm sure my body right now is going ahead and making an immune response to that. Vaccines just do that in a directed way when we need them to. And so vaccines are tremendously important public health measures. And just to finish up on that question, probably if you had to ask me, if you had to pick things out of the the 20th century that made a big difference, or the 19th to 20th centuries, one was understanding that your water supply and your septic system had to be separate, and the next would probably be vaccines. So how do we go about developing vaccines? So let's go through the normal vaccine development process. Normally, vaccines can be drawn from any one of a number of different categories. Some vaccines are made from the organism itself that's killed and that's given to people to develop an immune response. An example of that was the original inactivated polio vaccines. But there are any number of times when it's very simple. You grow up the organism, if it's a virus, and you kill it using a method of something that prevents it from being able to replicate or grow anymore. And then you give it as an injection. There are other ways you can do this. You can actually give a live virus that's not anywhere near as strong as the original one. That's another way of doing it. You can give a live virus that can't replicate, but has the same property of expressing the properties of the virus or the bacteria they're trying to get at. Or you can use a protein from the virus or the bacteria to raise an immune response. And that's only some of the different ways. So first one makes one of these constructs for a vaccine, and then one tests it in animals first to make sure that the animals can generate an immune response to this, making sure it's also safe and that the immune response doesn't create unintended consequences. And then once one is comfortable that it's safe in animals, one moves to looking at that vaccine in a small group of humans. One tries to find the appropriate dose to give. One gives, make sure that there's an immune response to that, and make sure it's safe. Those first studies are really to make sure primarily it's safe. Those are often called phase 1 studies. They then move, once you've determined it's safe, they will often move into phase 2 studies, which are larger studies, really determining whether the vaccine can produce immune responses that might be meaningful. Those phase 2 studies in larger groups of people, typically for a vaccine, it's actually a few hundred people up to that, are done. And then if the vaccine looks promising, one then goes ahead and does phase 3 studies, which are randomized controlled trials, generally either against a placebo, an inactive vaccine, or against an irrelevant vaccine that's not against what you're trying to prevent. And people are randomized, and it's usually thousands of individuals, can be up to tens of thousands of individuals. And one looks for the outcome of whether people get the infectious disease that one is trying to prevent. And at the end of the day, when you unblind the trial after a certain number of events, one can figure out whether the vaccine has been effective. Now, that's not the only type of clinical trial that can show vaccine efficacy, but for tonight or this afternoon, let's leave it simple like that. Once that vaccine efficacy has been shown, there's usually a very large safety data set that goes with that, and that's then submitted to regulatory authorities for approval. Now, how does that differ for the current COVID-19 outbreak? Well, normally, because vaccine development is a risky business, and because it's not one that pharmaceutical companies make a lot of money out of, they generally try to de-risk the process as much as possible. And this means they go one step after another, and they're generally not rushing things a whole lot. So it can take 4 or 5 years or more to develop a vaccine. Well, in the case of COVID-19, if we waited 4 or 5 years to develop a vaccine, we're all going to have herd immunity because this particular virus probably will have infected that many people. Probably at that point, we would have had 70 or 80% of the population infected, and then we will have, that's about the level of infection you need to get towards herd immunity. Unfortunately, in the process of getting there, we would lose a lot of people and create a lot of long-lasting adverse effects, which we're just beginning to understand. So for COVID-19, the idea is, can we collapse this process and make it move more quickly? Well, what are the tricks we can use? We can try to overlap certain pieces of the process. We can overlap some of the manufacturing work that we would normally not do at the same time as we're doing phase 1-2 studies, so that we can actually produce vaccine at risk that could be potentially used after an approval while you're having the development program go on. We can do very large trials in order to try to get to endpoints relatively quickly, and that's what's being done. You might have heard that the large phase 3 randomized trials in the United States are generally enrolling at least 30,000 patients. One of them is going to enroll 60,000 patients. It's to try to get to these endpoints relatively quickly within a few months rather than a year or more. And once those endpoints are reached, rather than using the traditional approval pathway for a vaccine, which is something called a biologics license application, that's where all of the data is collected into literally hundreds of thousands of pages, sent to FDA. It takes months to collect the data and put it in the right format, and then it takes us at FDA months to review it. What will probably happen in this case is a distillation of the most essential data will be submitted to the agency for something that is the equivalent of a temporary approval, but it's something called an emergency use authorization, which has a different standard than our normal biologics license application, but it allows us to move more quickly. In this particular case, the data is going to be similar to what we would have for a biologics license application in terms of the phase 3 clinical trial, in that the vaccine will need to show clear and compelling effectiveness, and it's going to need to show that it's safe because it's going to be given to healthy people. But we won't have quite as much safety data as we'd like, so we'll also have to, in this particular case for the COVID-19 vaccines, have a very vigorous post-deployment surveillance method, which will be using large databases to make sure we keep track of safety events. So it is going to be different for COVID-19 because we are in a place where obviously it would be wonderful to have the greatest degree of safety that we could possibly get to. On the other hand, we at FDA, we are constantly, what we do is we're like a scale that balances risk and benefit, And at this point, we have to, in doing that, we have to really balance this issue of, we'd like absolutely the safest possible vaccine, but if we get to the point of having minimal risk of safety issues, that might also mean we might get to a point where we lose many more people's lives from waiting longer. So we have to balance that to a place that is reasonable. And that's one of the things we do at FDA. So I'll stop there. Long-winded answer to get started with, sorry.
No, you're good. That's fantastic information and a great foundation for the rest of our discussion. I do want to return back to something that you mentioned a few moments ago, which is how many people we would end up losing if we waited for herd immunity. And we wanted to know if we have any idea of how many deaths have resulted from COVID per se, and how many are attributed to comorbidities, which are, of course, when multiple medical conditions are interacting with one another within the body. And also whether or not hospitals get funding by marking deaths as COVID related.
Yeah, I can't answer all of those questions perfectly, but I can answer some of them at least, because as someone who practiced medicine for a while, probably, if anything, we're going to find out that there were probably an underestimate of things that probably qualify as COVID-19 caused deaths. Now, when we put down as a doctor, if I put down the cause of death, most people don't die from just one cause. It is true, some people die of one cause, gunshot wound, or a massive heart attack. But very often, especially in older people, they have multiple comorbidities, as you've noted. But the proximal cause of death, the thing that triggered things, so they may have died ultimately of heart failure, but if what triggered it was the fact that they were in the hospital because they got COVID-19, probably the principal cause of death is going to be listed as COVID-19. I don't think anyone's trying to trick us with that, because our death statistics here are in line with death statistics in other parts of Western Europe, some of which have socialized medicine, and there's no benefit to them to over-reporting here. So I think we're probably not doing such a bad job there. I do think we might find out that there are more deaths ultimately attributable to the COVID-19 pandemic, in that there are probably people dying every day from heart attacks. Probably in the next, because this has gone on so long, there will probably be people who die of cancers simply because they didn't go get medical attention because of this pandemic. And the CDC estimated at one point earlier in the pandemic that could maybe be 20% more deaths than we're seeing now, but we don't really know what that number is. And my guess is when some of the dust settles, we'll really get a better idea. But it is a real challenge here. And, you know, we've had a lot of deaths. 210 million is, 210,000, sorry for that misspeak, 210,000 with, over 7 million cases is scary. But it could get much worse if we don't get this epidemic under control, particularly as we go into the winter season.
Right. So one of our respondents wanted to know what precautions the U.S. needs to take to protect national security in case of viral outbreaks, especially as you mentioned, we're heading into the winter and flu season.
Yeah. So this issue of before this outbreak, the United States actually has a pretty active program of where we plan for these types of events, because this is a matter of national security, making sure that we have people available to take care of the homeland, to take care of issues potentially overseas. That's why there's been a number of different elements of the response, including trying to have medical countermeasures developed as quickly as possible that can treat people with COVID-19, especially because there could be situations where some people can't avoid getting in harm's way and will need treatments. We need a vaccine as quickly as possible to help with national security, because that will help us, that will give us national security, help our national security the most quickly. It also is something that reminds us that for national security, how important domestic manufacturing is, because ultimately, I think this is not a knock against any country in the world. You're going to want to protect your population first. So you're going to want to have manufacturing capacity in your country that can make vaccine for your population. My hope is that we have enough capacity that we can make it for our own country and then start to export it as well, and that countries work well together to use excess capacity. But I think something coming out of COVID-19 as a key learning is how important it is to have this domestic capacity for making medicines in times of crisis.
So switching gears a little bit, we wanted to ask about environmental factors and reopening. So what relationship does air quality, ozone levels, and other types of environmental pollution have on one's susceptibility to the coronavirus?
Yeah, so I can't really, I can't speak to short-term exposures, which might not really make a big difference. But I can say that obviously, if you're somebody who's lived in cities, big cities with lots of smog for much of their lives, and I can say I've done that for a good part of my life, probably your lungs are not quite the same. If you happen to be somebody, as somebody who's lived in healthy, nice, wonderful, clean air environment, and if you happen to be someone who's lived in the city, who's also, that has a high amount of smog, one of the big cities, on the coast, perhaps, and you also smoke, that's probably putting you at some increased risk, and we know that. So probably the thing that matters most for COVID-19 is the condition of your lungs from either pre-existing conditions, like whether you might have asthma or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, which you could have because you were a smoker previously. And so it's less, I think, at least from my perspective, and there could be, don't get me wrong, there could be small effects from these other things. I'm just not aware of them. I'm not an expert in that area. But from my knowledge of what we've seen, the real issues become with, people who have had long-term exposures to lung irritants or who have underlying lung conditions. They're much more susceptible to the adverse effects of this, because when you get a respiratory virus, if you have less lung reserve, obviously there's a greater chance that you could end up with the most feared complications of COVID-19, which is respiratory failure and needing to end up on a ventilator, which is a very bad thing.
So what did you think about the decision to reopen schools this fall, and did you foresee a resurgence in COVID cases?
Yeah, so this is one where this is again a very challenging area where I'm not an expert. I'm not speaking now, and I'll speak now not for the United States government or the Health and Human Services or Food and Drug Administration. I'll just speak for myself, which is that, it is a very challenging thing with small children, slightly older children, and getting on to college age students about understanding what the right thing to do is here. Probably it's the largest challenge for smaller children where socialization is such an important thing. And I don't know what the right answer there is. And some communities have decided to reopen, some have not. I do think that for colleges, it really is a challenge here with reopening schools because what we know is that many of the, and I'm just going to be, I hope nobody gets offended here. What we know is that many things that college students like to do, which is get together in closed spaces with 2 carbon fragments, in glasses, that's a problem. Because if you don't have masks on and your two carbon fragments, for those of you who are not chemistry majors, those are is a code word for ethanol or alcohol, and that is a way of spreading this, particularly because when you lose your inhibitions, even if you started out interested in preventing COVID-19, you might not end up the evening still preventing COVID-19. And so it's a challenge on colleges. And so I don't know what the right answer is here. But I do worry that we are headed into a very, very precarious portion of the year. We have a respiratory virus that we know now is spread by droplets. We know that in closed environments, anyone who doubted this, look, anyone who looked at what happened on the first cruise ships could tell this. You didn't need to be a rocket scientist at CDC, right? Look at how efficiently this virus spread on cruise ships, right? So we know that in closed spaces, this thing can travel pretty nicely. And so what's happening now? We're going into that part of the year where we're going to be inside more. And that means we're going to have to double down on precautions that we take, because when we're inside more, there's going to be this potential for spread more. So it's going to be a time to be more cautious about how many people you have inside together. And so this is a long way around answer to the issue of schools is incredibly complicated, and it's a benefit risk. And I guess in certain situations, if you can have spaced out enough classes, and adherence to protocols, it's really possible that that could be acceptable. As you have less chance for this, or where you have more opportunity for situations where you might not have that appropriate social distancing or appropriate mask wearing, it gets more complicated. I wish I had a good answer for that one. I'm sorry.
That is a good answer for that one, I think. So let's move into an understanding of more alternative therapies and what the vaccine will actually look like. So one of our respondents noted that approximately 15% of common colds are caused by 3 different mild coronaviruses that we don't develop long-term immunity to. So do you believe that we can develop a vaccine with long-lasting immunity? And if so, how long might that immunity last? And alternatively, is it likely that a COVID-19 vaccine will become an annual vaccine like a flu shot?
So whoever asked that question, make sure you email me, because we can offer you a job at FDA, because you're really asking a really great question. And maybe there's a great career for you in public health. It's a really great question. And it is probably one of the most important questions that we don't really absolutely know the answer to. We have some animal models now, but we don't really have the kind of long-term data that we'd really like to see. So we need to see human information on this. And we're going to have to see what this is. We don't know how long the immune response will last. We know that after natural infection, after a few months, the immune response starts to wane. And we do know that, at least in rare case reports, people do seem to be able, after a number of months, to possibly be reinfected. We don't know how common that is yet. So one of the things we'll be really watching closely with these vaccines, and I'm going to use a little license here and bring in something besides the immune response of making antibodies. There's also this immune response of having the T cells of the body. Antibodies come from B cells, but the T cells of the body are kind of the commanders of the immune response, and they help nurture the B cells that make antibodies, and they also have the immune memory. And the question is whether that immune memory will be sufficient to come back and get rid of these coronavirus, this COVID-19, is a real big question. The other thing we have to obviously be worried about is, could coronavirus, COVID-19, be like influenza, where it can potentially change and evade our vaccine of today? Now, so far we're hoping that's not the case, but we're going to have to keep our eyes on that. So what this questioner are excellent questions that I don't have the answer to. What I do know is that at least I can say this, that's to be reassuring. It looks like the current generation of vaccines will give us at least months of immunity. And that's, at least for right now, for breaking the cycle, probably going to be good enough. It may be that we're going to have boosters to get us through this initial thing. It may be that additional newer vaccines that will be developed, because all we're seeing now is the first wave. And there are actually, last I looked, I was on the WHO website, there are over 190 vaccines in some stage of development. And so there may be better ones that will come along that will tickle the immune system better. But great question. And I wish for all of us I could give you more certainty. The best, most positive thing I can say is that at least we think we'll get a number of months of immunity. And that may just be enough to get us out of this this essentially quandary that we're in right now.
Thank
Hopefully
you.
it'll give us more.
So I'm going to go a little bit off book because you mentioned that animal models are being used now. What animals in particular?
So it turns out that infectious diseases that infect humans, sometimes it's very hard to find an animal model that works for them. We're lucky in this particular case that, first of all, because we understand the receptor on the cell that gets this virus into cells and allows it to enter and wreak its havoc, we're able to generate mice that have that receptor, the human receptor in them, so we can have a mouse model. It also turns out, so there's a mouse model, it also turns out that Syrian hamsters are infected by COVID-19, and they get many of the same pathology in their lungs that humans get. And then in a non-human primate, there are monkeys that also will mirror, certain types of monkeys also mirror this. Obviously, we use animal models as the person who has been, who cares about this deeply, we want to minimize the number of animals we use in these, but we use them very judiciously to help us develop these vaccines in as fast a manner as we can. Animals, there's no substitute in this kind of an emergency situation for the information that we can get, because we can use larger numbers of animals, such as mice or hamsters, and the whole process is so much more quick, and we can infect them at a given point in time. Whereas you can imagine that some people on the phone may have heard, or on this Zoom may have heard of this possible human challenge studies to try to see if vaccines work. Those are a whole lot of ethical problems. Plus, they're very challenging to do, whereas we can control things and get good answers. So there are a couple of different animal models. They help us tremendously. I think we all realize that we have to use those animal models very judiciously and thoughtfully, but they can be tremendously helpful.
Thank you. And then what about alternative therapy? Like, is a vaccine the only scientifically sound mitigation to the coronavirus, or could other alternative therapies, such as were developed for HIV, that would support the body's ability to combat the disease, be useful? So thinking about, like, is Dr. Robert Redfield of the CDC correct in saying that a face mask might protect us better from the coronavirus than a vaccine?
Yeah, I don't know what he was really referring to there, and I can't speak to that. I mean, look, I have my face mask around. I always have it with me. It's there. I love wearing it as much as I need to. But since I'm in an empty basement with myself, myself, and I right now, I'm okay without it on. So obviously, there are the precautions we can all take for doing this. I think when you said alternative, I was thinking you might have meant alternative medicine, and I don't know that there's any great thing of alternative medicine. I do think probably if you eat enough garlic, you'll reek enough that you'll probably make sure that there's 6 to 8 foot social distancing. So that's probably something you can do. So if you try to consume 2 to 3 heads of garlic a day, you probably will, probably we could do a study that would say that might help reduce this issue. But all kidding aside, I think the answer here, that if you think about what other things you could have, could there be alternatives that could be there instead of a vaccine? Could, for instance, you give antibody injections like we do, for instance, in the case of hepatitis? So one of the ways we used to prevent people from getting hepatitis A when they went to settings where they might get hepatitis A was to give them hepatitis A immune globulin. It's basically giving the antibodies instead of an active immune response where your own body generates it. It's a passive immune response, somebody else's that's given to you. So there's that, but that's kind of cumbersome to do. And then there's this idea of, could you do this like HIV, where there's a pill like a protease inhibitor or a cocktail? And that's, people are really working on that, because that would be very nice to have as a prevention, possibly, and certainly it would be nice to have as treatment. The problem there is that when you think about this in the global scale, vaccines are really the only global solution. Because if you have to give literally hundreds of millions of people pills day after day, you just can't keep up. Whereas a vaccine is once or twice, as you see, and at least we know we may get months out of it, and hopefully we'll get more than that. So not to poo-poo, that's not to say anything that we shouldn't be absolutely driving towards finding small molecules that interrupt and put this virus out of business. But it says that while we're doing that, we still have to very actively pursue a vaccine, because particularly in low and middle income countries, the way that we're going to help wipe out COVID-19 is with a vaccine. Well, that's probably also the case in our high income country, the United States.
Good. So, but one more question here, and then we're going to move more specifically into concerns about the timeline for the development of the vaccine. But do you have any idea about how long social distancing measures might remain in place or might need to remain in place after the vaccine is released, and like what percentage of the population really needs to be vaccinated before those measures could be lifted?
I wish I had a crystal ball for some of those things. I do have an answer for one of them, which is that generally to have herd immunity in a population, we'll need to have about 70 to 80% of the population either vaccinated or immune, and with a vaccine that's 70 to 80% effective, right? Now, I can't say that those are the exact numbers, but that's probably Dr. Tony Fauci, who I just can't say enough wonderful things about. That's, I think, what he would say. It's about 70 to 80% of the population vaccinated with a vaccine that's about 70 to 80% effective. We know this actually because we know what it takes to keep herd immunity against measles, against pertussis, against a number of other infectious diseases. So that's probably where we're going to have to get to. Unfortunately, that's a pretty tall order from where we are now. It means we're going to have a very massive vaccination campaign, probably sometime over this winter and into the spring. So we may very well be socially distancing into next spring easily. I wish I had better news about that, but the hope would be that we'll start to see areas of the country where there's very good vaccine coverage. And my guess, again, in my crystal ball, and this is again, not anyone, this is not official government opinion, but just my thoughts on this, is that my guess is there'll be some places in the country where there'll be greater, just by chance, there'll be greater vaccine uptake. Those places will have the virus come under control. They'll start to come back to normal. People will see, wow, this city seems to be, or this county or this state seems to really be doing well. Let's emulate what they've done. And so that may be how that we come out of this. But unfortunately, we're in this for a longer haul. And I mean, the part of this that I mean, I know some people say, well, younger folks, they don't really die of this very often, and you know, they're just should go about their business. But when you read about the occasional younger person who does die of this, it's just so terrible. It's just so terrible. So we need to take this seriously, and unfortunately, it means we have to be in this for the long haul, which does mean preparing ourselves mentally to go through this winter, taking precautions. There's no one probably, I can't tell you how much I hope that we have a vaccine in the next few months, and we'll probably talk more about that, that can get us there faster. But honestly, by the time it's actually deployed in enough Americans to make a difference, it's probably going to be sometime this spring if everything goes really well.
So speaking of timelines, a few of our respondents did express concern about more aggressive testing and efficacy in determining long-term side effects, et cetera. So one wrote in, the Association of American Medical Colleges wrote an article about multiple vaccinations that were more detrimental than the disease itself, including the initial vaccines for polio, measles, RSV, and dengue fever. Are you concerned that there is a possibility of history repeating itself with the speed in which the COVID vaccines are being pushed through testing? And more specifically, how safe and how effective is the vaccine likely to be?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And I think we obviously always have to be concerned and thoughtful that we do not repeat history, because people who don't learn from history are destined to repeat it. And as a history buff, one of my goals is not to repeat it. So the reference here, I'm not going to go through all of the references here, but the reference here to polio was to a terrible episode in the history of vaccines that occurred around 1955, where the inactivated polio vaccine, which is, remember I told you up front that one of the ways you can make a vaccine is to take the virus itself and to kill it off. Unfortunately, the way they used to kill that was to use formaldehyde. And unfortunately, they didn't fully kill some of it. And a bunch of children were vaccinated with what ended up being live polio virus that was actually supposed to be a vaccine. Horrible history. If you want to read about it more, there's a book by Paul Offit, who's at Johns Hopkins, fantastic vaccinologist, called The Cutter Incident. We've learned from that. So manufacturing is, anyone who knows me knows that I'm kind of if I preach about how important it is that we're going to have manufacturing under control, and that's what we're going to do here. I think in terms of safety and efficacy, we're going to have the data from large randomized trials. So it's not going to be some quick run to market here. And finally, in terms of safety, although we are going to probably have to take a very calculated small risk by not having 6 or 12 or 2 years worth of safety data, we're going to be watching these vaccines like hawks. And that's not just the Food and Drug Administration, it's also the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, and it's also other agencies that will be looking at this, as well as private insurers that are going to be keeping their eye on, are there any excess of any type of untoward event? And there's a balance here, because obviously we would like more time. Would we like to have more time to have more safety events accrue? Sure, we would. But at the same time, we have to say, look, at a certain point in time, we're going to let this go. And that's why in our guidance that we was just released today, we noted that we want a median of about 2 months of follow-up for these vaccines when they come in for an emergency use authorization. Now, some would argue we need longer than that. Some would argue, well, why don't we just get it out there? We picked 2 months because in 2 months is when you see many of the really important side effects you would see in that amount of time. So it's something that we will, and a median means that we have some people that will be followed longer than that, some that will be shorter. And the good news is in these very large trials, where we're talking 30,000 people, it means that that will mean that probably at least a few thousand people will be followed for longer periods. So there is a lot of eyes on this, and we are aware of history and simply will not repeat it, just like we're not going to let other things be repeated, such as many of the other mistakes that were made in clinical trials in the past.
So as different countries and corporations race toward a vaccine, is there any concern that the competition might impact the studies that are intended, in fact, to ensure the vaccine's efficacy?
You know, I think at this point, I guess the question is competition going to hurt in this race for a vaccine? I think competition, if it's not, people doing silly things like declaring a vaccine that doesn't have really efficacy data as effective and giving it to people, that's really not helpful. When countries do that, that's irresponsible. It's the equivalent of driving drunk. We shouldn't be doing that, okay? On the other hand, I think that having a healthy competition here of different countries looking at different vaccine technologies, because in the United States, we just can't look at all the different technologies at once. There's just not enough people even, believe it or not, in clinical trials. So I actually think it's wonderful that there are other countries. For instance, we're not looking at a killed vaccine, a killed virus vaccine given with something called an adjuvant. An adjuvant is something that helps stimulate the immune system when given with a antigen like a virus or a bacteria. We're not studying those in the United States, but they're being studied outside of the United States. And I think that's good because some could say, well, why are they doing that? They're doing that. It's good to have diversity here. And it may turn out that that is a very good vaccine. So I don't think it's that terrible that we have some healthy competition here. Because ultimately, my guess is that what we'll settle on as a global community is we will see which vaccines work the best. And ultimately, we will help each other, I hope, with our production capabilities, focus on making the most of those that are the most effective in this version. I can't say for sure that's going to happen, but somehow I get the sense that from conversations that I've heard that that's what people would like to see us aim for.
Good. And if I could just ask, why is the U.S. not, like, why did the U.S. choose not to pursue testing a virus or a vaccine that includes a killed virus with an antigen?
It's a really great question. In some ways, it was probably a matter of the potential. There are a lot of different issues with that, ranging from when you grow up large quantities of a live virus that is infectious like this. That's a challenge of itself, although it can be done. There was a concern that I haven't gotten into, especially back earlier on, of something where sometimes when you immunize against a virus, you can end up actually creating an adverse reaction when you're actually exposed to the virus. And we wanted to make sure that this thing of enhanced respiratory disease, which can occur, and it's been seen with other viruses like coronavirus, didn't occur. And there was some hint that maybe using a killed virus vaccine would lead to a larger amount of that, although we'll now see whether that's truly the case. So this was based on the bets were made here on the basis of you only have so many things you can concentrate and focus on. And there was a diverse array of vaccines that are actually in development. It so happens that we do have 2 mRNA-based vaccines, but in addition, there are non-replicating viral vectors that are in more advanced development. And not too far behind are protein subunit vaccines and live viral vectors. So the good news is that globally, these things will get investigated and the answer will be there.
Wonderful. And then finally, before we turn to questions from our live audience, we've got one more, which is, given the resistance to social distancing and mask wearing measures that is developed through the lens of civil liberty and personal freedom, how will you encourage the widespread use of a COVID vaccine?
Yeah, so I have two answers to that. First of all, we're going to do everything in our power at FDA to make sure that we have a process that's transparent so that people see that we really care, that what we put out in terms of an approval is based on the scientific data, that a vaccine truly is safe and effective and a quality product, that it's a vaccine that we feel comfortable using on ourselves, our families, and our friends. And hopefully they'll see this, that we'll have confidence in that small microcosm will then build out to the macrocosm. But more importantly, I think what will probably happen, and this alludes back to something that I said before, is that they're probably, just like in anything, there are early adopters and late adopters. My guess is there will be areas of the country that will be early adopters of a vaccine with higher vaccine coverage, and some that might be later adopters. And those that get to a place where they are actually able to go back into restaurants again, go bowling, go to the movies, because they have such low COVID rates, probably people will then emulate those, because nothing will bring this back more than the vision of success, particularly if that success is not associated with any significant number of adverse events of concern, and with a good track record for a vaccine. So I think to get the first uptake, it's going to be that we've done our job as public health agencies, that we've helped restore trust, which I cannot deny has been eroded in vaccines, but we do what we can to help restore trust. And then hopefully once the vaccine is deployed, some of this will be, the proof is in the pudding. People will see it in action, and we'll see what it can do.
Wonderful, thank you. And at this point, we do want to open it up to anybody in our audience right now. If you have any questions, please do put them in the chat. And Becky will be monitoring that for us. I do have an additional two that she has sent to me. One comes from KGNU, and I think that you were talking about this a little bit right now, but their question is the goal to use a vaccine to get life back to the way it was pre-COVID, or is it only going to get us part of the way back?
I would like to hope, again, this is the vision for a vaccine, and whether we'll get there, I don't know, but a really good vaccine could hopefully get us to where we were pre-COVID. Just for those of you who aren't familiar with vaccines, probably, and most of the people hearing my voice have received the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine. The measles component is 98% effective. If you have 90+% of your population vaccinated with that vaccine, you're not going to see measles, because you have a very good vaccine and you have enough people vaccinated against it. And there's no room for measles to go. And measles is a very infectious virus. So measles is probably one of the ones where herd immunity, the percentage of people that need to be vaccinated, is even higher than some others. So hopefully we'll have a vaccine that's very effective, and hopefully enough people will get vaccinated with it. And that combination will hopefully get, that combination combined, by the way, I don't want to dismiss something else. My guess is what's going to happen is that combination will get us back to being able to get there. What will probably happen on the way is, if I had to look at my crystal ball, the vaccine will beat back COVID-19 in certain populations first. It will then go into a more general population. We will get COVID-19 back under control enough that we'll start to actually be able to do contact tracing, because we won't be overwhelmed. We'll be able to use testing to our advantage. And ultimately, as the number of people vaccinated gets even further, we'll start to gently shift back towards the normal lives that we'd like to live. I can't tell you, I only wish for all of you that I had a crystal ball that I could tell you that was going to be in a year or 8 months or 16 months. We don't know. But if we all work together here, I think, and we come together, we'll get there faster.
So you just mentioned that there are certain populations that will get the vaccine first. Could you be more specific with that?
Yeah, that's actually not our department necessarily at FDA. It's the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. But what I was alluding to is that there are much smarter people than me that have gone together, the National Academy of Science and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, their Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. They've started to think about, if you have a limited amount of vaccine, how you deploy that so that you help the most people. So do you give it to frontline people who are coming in contact potentially with COVID, who it might be hard for them to avoid it? Do you give it to people in nursing homes? Because if you're over 80 years old and you get COVID-19, it's really bad. So you help protect them. So they're thinking about how to deploy that right up front. The hope is that we can move very quickly behind that with a large number of doses so that we get the rest of the population vaccinated. But there's a lot of thought being given to that. Some of that will also depend. So I can't tell you for sure that that's how those are the populations that are going to be, because some of it will actually depend on the characteristics of the vaccine itself, because some vaccines might have a better side effect profile in older individuals that makes it more beneficial to take it into older individuals first than even younger individuals, or vice versa. So we'll just have to see. But my guess is that we'll see the initial wave of the vaccine will be targeted, and then it will become into a more general population. But again, that's not so much FDA's purview, but in the broader public health agencies that will chime in there.
Okay, thank you. So another question that's come through is, what is the threshold of acceptable side effects? I can't be more specific than that.
No, I know where they're going.
Okay.
So the threshold of acceptable side effects is pretty low, okay? And it's very difficult to describe with certainty. There are minor side effects that many vaccines cause, such as local discomfort where they're injected, or pain at the injection site for a day or so. Some of them can cause low-grade fever. Some of them can cause a little fatigue. Generally, we have a rating score for adverse events, and without going into the details, it ranges from 1, which is really mild. You almost wouldn't notice it. It's kind of like a minimal mosquito bite that you kind of might notice a little bit, and then you can just, by distraction, you wouldn't notice it. And then there's 5, which is like you're not around to talk about it. Very bad. So we generally, with vaccines, want to see really, if there's going to be stuff, it's going to be grade 1, possibly grade 2 adverse events, and not a lot of the population, but it might be in some. And we don't want to see adverse events that land people in the hospital or with any lasting disability. And it doesn't take very many of them to get us really upset. How many? A handful could get us very upset at a vaccine, even in this type of a setting, because it's not just a matter of a straight trade-off of, well, you could have saved 1,000 lives, but 5 people lost their lives because of the vaccine. We don't really have a very good acceptance of friendly fire with vaccines. We need to have a clean safety profile. And so we would want to make sure, because otherwise people won't take the vaccine. So we're going to be looking very closely there. So some people say, well, why don't you get the vaccine out real fast? You guys just get it out, because even if there are side effects, we can take that. Well, that won't work, because people won't take a vaccine if they know that there's any significant potential for really bad side effects. There's going to possibly, there always with vaccines could be some side effects. And there are, even with the influenza vaccine, there can be you know, in a 1 in a million type basis, people get something called Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is a paralysis that requires hospitalization, and you can end up on a respirator. But you know, 1 in a million type of events, could you accept? Yes, possibly, depending on what they are. But we wouldn't be able to accept, you know, anything that's, you know, common if they were really bad side effects. And I'm sorry not to be able to get more specific. It's just there are so many different combinations of things that one could have. But what I'm trying to say is that generally mild side effects, even if you had a very mild side effect that occurred in a significant number of people, like there are some mild side effects like local redness and swelling that for some vaccines occur in a third or a half of people, but because they're minor and they go away and there's no residual problem, and then the person has very good immunity, we'll accept those. On the other hand, serious things we don't look so easily at.
Thank you. And what, or how does the FDA timeline for vaccine approval differ from the White House timeline?
You know, I'm going to try to finesse this without getting myself into jail. So let's say this. I think there's optimistic timelines here of when you could have a vaccine. Given the large trials that are ongoing, one, is it possible that one could have, or one of these trials reach its interim endpoint late in October? It's possible. It's more likely that one's going to reach its interim endpoint sometime in November or December. And I think, again, I'm very much in line with something that Dr. Fauci said last night on CNN, which is that, yeah, it's not unlikely that we'll see something submitted probably before the end of the calendar year in terms of an emergency use authorization request from the agency. I don't know that for sure, but I think it's a reasonable probability. So we'll just have to see what happens there. There are a lot of different, you know, a lot of people can opine on this, but we'll just have to see where it comes in. At FDA, we're just going to remain ready because when it comes in, we're committed to a very transparent process, making sure that any vaccine that comes in, not only will we do our work, but we'll also bring it to a public advisory committee meeting where an independent group of academics who have been vetted for conflict of interest will discuss the vaccine, and it'll be in a public setting. People will be able to watch it and will be able to hear what they have to say. Public can even comment at the meeting, and we'll be able to hear what they say about the vaccine. So we're ready to do that whenever it comes. And so I'm hoping sooner rather than later for something that's really safe and effective, because the sooner we can all move past this, the sooner we'll have, you know, people getting back to lives and livelihoods, because we haven't touched on the social and economic costs of COVID-19, which are quite considerable.
So speaking of the vaccine, if a person can provide evidence of a positive antibody or PCR test, will they be able to waive a work or travel requirement for the vaccine?
Great question. And I suspect that's going to be one that the Centers for Disease Control will probably have an answer for. But I can tell you from listening to global colleagues talk about this, there's a lot of talk in the global community of having something like an iPhone app where you'll either be able to be documented as vaccinated or known to be immune by some method. So I can't say that that's American policy, but I can say that that's what's being thought of on a global basis. I mean, it seems to make a lot of sense to me, but we'll see where that goes.
Thank you. And Becky, are there any other questions?
There's one right now. I could just go ahead and ask it if you'd like me to. It's sitting here in the chat. There's actually a number of them. Sorry, I'm texting them to Don, and I'm not being fast because I'm listening at the same time. I'm multitasking. Don't multitask. Okay, so Dr. Marks, do you think that the rush to produce a COVID vaccine will shift the culture in which we view vaccine development? traditionally a field less funded and attributed, as far as my understanding goes. Please correct me if I'm wrong. And compared to profitable pharmaceuticals. Let me just read that. I'll pull out the parenthetical.
I got you know something. I got it. It's a great question.
Yeah.
So the bottom line, I'll just rephrase the question is the development paradigm for vaccines going to change such that their appropriate import of, as in the importance of vaccines, will be valued in the future compared to conventional pharmaceuticals, which tend to outshine them? And I can probably say that, at least from the standpoint of having the attention of the government, we're pretty serious now that probably after this, in the after action, we're going to have to be ready to be able to develop vaccines in a way that's very facile, because and be able to address these things. Because as much as we'd all like to know, this is the problem with knowing a little bit of statistics. Well, so what's the chance that we're going to have another once in a century event next year? Well, it's still, unfortunately, the fact is, it's still possible that in the next 10 or 20 years, we could have another really bad event, despite the fact that this is the worst pandemic probably in a century. And so we're going to have to be ready for that. And so I think we have probably rethought how important vaccines are to us as a community. And that I can't say right now, are we all, where that's going to end up. But I do suspect that after this is all over, there will be a new respect for the need for vaccine manufacturing capacity. And, it's all happening. Something that's a little more technical that I haven't talked about previously with you is that this was all happening while we were talking about trying to have vaccines transition anyway to a more efficient production methodologies, something called continuous manufacturing, where you can make vaccines in a much smaller footprint and make them more efficiently. And so my guess is after this is over, we're going to see a lot of discussion about moving in that direction for national security purposes.
So there's another one here, and this one is about the flu vaccine. How important do you think this year's flu vaccine will play in the winter season of COVID?
So although wearing masks can also help prevent flu, the best way to help deal with this is to get a flu shot. And although the flu shot is an example of a vaccine that's not perfectly effective by any means, the side effects associated with the flu shot are pretty small, and it's probably worthwhile everyone going out and getting a flu shot. If you ask me, have I been vaccinated yet? No, not yet, but at 8:30 tomorrow morning, I will be vaccinated. So it's good to go out and get vaccinated against the flu. It will help deconvolute some of the craziness of having flu and COVID circulating at the same time. So having a flu shot is a good thing.
Don, are you looking at the chat? Do you want to take over here?
I am. I think we probably have time for one final question. So I was just going to grab the last one that came in, which is from Mackenzie, who asks, this might not be your area of expertise, but do you know what pandemics will look like in the future in regards to climate change? Or does climate change play a role in the pandemic at all?
So all I can tell you is what I've read, and there is this concern that as we have, if there is a warmer environment, that is this a more hospitable place for emerging organisms? I don't know. I can't really say for sure. But if we look, we have had over the past years any number of viruses emerge that have been pretty much concerning, whether that's just because we're better at detecting them or whether that's because there are more emerging more quickly. I think it just means that we're going to have to be prepared. And whether or not we care about the viruses, I think we have to care about our Earth enough to take care of this problem because we can't have a situation where if the viruses don't get us, something else will. So again, not the opinion of the United States government, the Health and Human Services, or the Food and Drug Administration, but probably taking good care of the Earth is a good thing.
Yeah, And that's a fantastic final thought to leave us with. I want to thank Dr. Peter Marks with much gratitude for taking time out of your very busy day to talk with us and help share your knowledge. I know a lot of times you were saying that you don't have a crystal ball, and you know, maybe it's not the best best news, but I feel much more enlightened and better just knowing where we stand and what things look like. And so thank you for coming in and enlightening all of us. And I want to thank everybody for coming in and joining us in this Zoom event to share, ask questions and interact with our expert today. So thank you to all of you for taking time out of your day. And once again, thank you very much to Dr. Marks.
Thanks so much for having me, and all take care. Be safe. Take care. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Be well, everyone.